In this episode, we move into a topic that helps explain why good controls cannot simply be designed, tested once, and then trusted forever. A control may look strong at the moment it is introduced, but organizations do not stand still, and neither do their systems, people, vendors, or business pressures. That means a safeguard that worked well 6 months ago can become weaker, less relevant, or easier to bypass without anyone making a deliberate decision to weaken it. This is why techniques for control monitoring and continuous improvement matter so much for anyone studying certified in risk and information systems control, (CRISC). For a beginner, the easiest way to understand this subject is to think of control monitoring as the ongoing practice of checking whether safeguards are still operating the way they should, while continuous improvement is the discipline of learning from what is observed and making the control environment stronger over time instead of assuming that yesterday's design will always be enough for tomorrow's risks. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Control monitoring is different from one-time control testing, even though the two ideas are closely related. Testing often happens at a defined moment to determine whether a control exists, whether it is designed appropriately, and whether it appears to be operating effectively during the period being reviewed. Monitoring, by contrast, is more ongoing and more operational. It asks whether the control continues to work across normal business activity, changing workloads, staffing shifts, new technologies, process updates, and all the other pressures that can slowly weaken a safeguard without making that weakness immediately obvious. For beginners, this distinction matters because it shows why an organization can pass a review and still develop control problems later. A control may have been sound when it was examined, but daily operations can introduce drift. Monitoring helps the organization notice that drift earlier, before a control failure becomes a larger business problem or before leadership continues trusting a safeguard that no longer deserves the same level of confidence. A helpful way to understand control monitoring is to focus on the questions it tries to answer over time. Is the control still being performed when and how it is supposed to be performed? Are the right people carrying it out with enough consistency and understanding? Are exceptions increasing, delays becoming common, or workarounds emerging that suggest the control is becoming harder to sustain? Is the control still aligned with the actual process and risk it was meant to address, or has the environment changed enough that the original design no longer fits? These questions show that monitoring is about much more than checking boxes. It is about keeping the control alive as part of the operating environment. For a beginner, that is one of the most important lessons in the topic. A control is not just a rule or tool that exists in a document. It is a living part of how the organization manages risk, and like any living part of the organization, it requires attention if it is going to remain useful and reliable. One of the most practical techniques for control monitoring is regular evidence review. This means examining the records, approvals, logs, reports, tickets, reconciliations, or other artifacts that show whether the control was actually performed. Evidence review is powerful because it moves the conversation away from general confidence and toward observable behavior. A manager may believe reviews are happening on time, but the records may show repeated delays. A system owner may believe access is tightly governed, but approval evidence may be incomplete or missing. For beginners, evidence review is easy to picture because it simply asks what proof exists that the control operated as expected. It is not enough for someone to say the process is working well. Monitoring becomes more credible when the organization checks whether the records support that claim, whether the activity happened at the right intervals, whether exceptions were handled properly, and whether the evidence itself is reliable enough to show that the control is more than a good intention. Trend analysis is another powerful technique because control weakness often appears gradually rather than all at once. A single missed review or one delayed approval may not mean much by itself, but repeated missed reviews, rising backlogs, or longer closure times can reveal a control that is coming under strain. Trend analysis helps the organization see whether performance is stable, improving, or deteriorating across weeks, months, or reporting periods. It can show whether the same issue keeps returning in one area, whether a previously strong control is slipping, or whether recent improvements are actually having a sustained effect. For beginners, this matters because it shifts monitoring away from isolated snapshots. A control can look acceptable in a single period and still be moving in the wrong direction overall. By watching patterns over time, the organization gains a more honest picture of control health and is better able to intervene before problems become severe enough to affect customers, operations, compliance obligations, or executive trust. Thresholds and triggers make monitoring more actionable because they help define when a change in control performance should lead to additional attention, escalation, or remediation. If leaders wait for every issue to become obviously serious before responding, they often respond too late. A threshold might be based on the number of overdue reviews, the percentage of unresolved exceptions, the frequency of failed control steps, or repeated evidence gaps in a critical process. A trigger tells the organization that the situation has moved beyond routine observation and into a state that requires action. For a beginner, this is useful because it shows how monitoring connects to governance. The organization is not collecting information for decoration. It is using defined signals to decide when performance has moved outside acceptable bounds. Strong thresholds are tied to business importance and risk level, not chosen at random. They help teams avoid endless debate over whether a control issue is serious enough to matter because the response expectations are already clearer before the problem grows larger. Direct observation is also an important monitoring technique, especially for controls that depend heavily on human action, judgment, or coordination across teams. People often describe processes in their best form, but observation can reveal what really happens when deadlines tighten, staff are busy, or supporting information is incomplete. A control may be documented as requiring thoughtful review, yet observation may show that staff complete the task quickly with limited understanding because they are under pressure to move on to other work. For beginners, observation is valuable because it reveals the difference between procedure and practice. It helps the organization see whether the control fits into the real workflow, whether people know how to perform it well, and whether hidden workarounds are becoming normal. Monitoring that relies only on reports can miss these realities. Observation gives risk and control owners a better chance to understand the environment as it is actually operating, which is essential if continuous improvement is supposed to address real conditions rather than ideal descriptions. Another useful technique is monitoring both control performance and control outcome instead of assuming those two things are always the same. A control may appear active because reviews are completed, approvals are recorded, or reports are generated on schedule. Yet the actual risk outcome may still be poor if those activities are superficial, badly targeted, or disconnected from the real business exposure. On the other hand, a low incident count does not automatically prove the control is strong. The organization may simply be fortunate, or the problems may not be visible yet. For beginners, this distinction is extremely important because it helps avoid false confidence. Monitoring control activity tells the organization whether the expected actions are occurring, while monitoring outcome helps reveal whether those actions are producing meaningful protection. Mature programs do both. They look at whether the control is being performed and whether the condition it was meant to influence is staying stable, improving, or quietly becoming more dangerous despite the appearance of compliance. Continuous improvement begins when the organization treats monitoring results as learning material rather than as static reporting content. If evidence shows recurring delays, repeated exceptions, weak approvals, confusing procedures, or growing staff frustration, those signals should lead to questions about why the control is struggling and what would make it stronger. Sometimes the problem lies in weak execution. Sometimes the problem lies in poor design. A control may demand information people do not have, rely on too many manual steps, or create a level of friction that encourages bypass behavior. For beginners, continuous improvement means refusing to treat the first version of a control as permanent. It means recognizing that the operating environment teaches lessons over time. The goal is not to change controls constantly in search of perfection. The goal is to learn from performance and adjust thoughtfully so the control remains effective, realistic, and aligned with the business rather than becoming a brittle rule that survives only on paper. Root cause analysis is one of the most important tools in continuous improvement because surface symptoms are often easier to see than the conditions that created them. If a control is repeatedly late, the organization can demand faster completion, but that may not solve the real issue. The underlying cause might be poor ownership, confusing handoffs, weak training, missing data, insufficient staffing, or a process design that no longer fits the workload. If the organization improves only the visible symptom, the same control may fail again in slightly different ways. For beginners, this is a key lesson because it turns monitoring from simple inspection into real learning. A strong program does not just ask what went wrong. It asks why it went wrong and whether that same cause could affect other controls in related areas. Continuous improvement becomes much more valuable when it is driven by understanding rather than blame, because understanding gives the organization a chance to fix patterns, not just isolated events that happen to be noticed first. Ownership and governance matter greatly, because control monitoring and improvement do not happen well when responsibility is unclear. Someone must be accountable for watching the control, reviewing its evidence, recognizing when performance is weakening, and pushing improvement forward when the data shows change is needed. In some cases, that responsibility sits with a business process owner. In others, it may be shared with technology, compliance, risk, or quality functions. What matters most is that the organization knows who is responsible for performance, who challenges assumptions, who reviews trends, and who can authorize meaningful changes. For a beginner, this is another reminder that strong controls depend on more than design and technology. They also depend on clear governance. When ownership is vague, weak performance lingers because everyone assumes someone else is paying attention. Continuous improvement becomes far more likely when control health has visible accountability and when leadership receives enough reporting to see whether important safeguards are improving, drifting, or being quietly tolerated in a weakened state. A major reason continuous improvement is necessary is control drift, which happens when a safeguard slowly loses strength over time, even though nobody officially changed its purpose. Drift can happen when staff leave, when systems are upgraded, when new vendors or business processes are added, when time pressure encourages shortcuts, or when old exceptions quietly become normal practice. Control fatigue can also develop when people begin treating a safeguard as repetitive bureaucracy rather than as an important protection. They may still go through the motions, but the substance becomes thinner with each cycle. For beginners, this is one of the most realistic parts of the topic because it reflects how organizations actually behave. Most controls do not fail dramatically on the day after they are introduced. They weaken gradually through neglect, overload, misalignment, or normalization of small compromises. Monitoring exists to catch that weakening early, and continuous improvement exists to respond before leaders are relying on a control that looks familiar but no longer delivers the protection they assume it provides. A useful way to think about continuous improvement is as a repeating cycle rather than a one-time correction. The organization observes control performance, identifies patterns, investigates causes, adjusts the control or its supporting process, watches the results, and then repeats the cycle as the environment continues to change. This approach keeps the control environment from becoming static and disconnected from real business conditions. It also helps the organization mature over time because each round of learning can improve not just one control, but the way the organization designs, owns, monitors, and supports controls more broadly. For beginners, this cycle is important because it removes the unrealistic idea that good controls are built once and then left untouched. Mature organizations know that sustaining reliability requires repeated attention. They use monitoring results to improve training, clarify procedures, redesign steps, add automation where useful, remove unnecessary friction, and strengthen escalation paths. Improvement is therefore not a sign that the original control was a failure. It is a sign that the organization is learning and adapting responsibly. A practical example can bring the topic together. Imagine an organization has a control requiring periodic review of privileged access for a critical application. Monitoring techniques might include checking completion evidence, analyzing delays by department, observing how managers perform the reviews, and tracking whether inappropriate access is actually removed after the review is complete. Over time, The organization may notice that reviews are technically completed on schedule, yet too many users keep access that no longer matches their job role. A deeper look may reveal that managers do not receive clear enough information to make good decisions, and that role definitions in the application are overly broad. Continuous improvement in that case would not mean sending another reminder alone. It would mean improving the review data, clarifying role design, updating training, and then monitoring whether those changes lead to better decisions in the next cycle. That example shows why monitoring and improvement belong together. Monitoring reveals what is happening, and improvement responds in a way that strengthens the control rather than merely documenting the weakness. As we close, the main idea to carry forward is that techniques for control monitoring and continuous improvement help organizations keep their safeguards effective in a world that does not stay still. Monitoring provides ongoing visibility through evidence review, trend analysis, thresholds, observation, and attention to both activity and outcome. Continuous improvement turns those observations into learning, deeper understanding, and better control performance over time. C-Risk expects you to recognize that strong controls are not sustained by hope, habit, or initial design quality alone. They are sustained by watching them carefully, questioning whether they still fit the risk and the business, and making adjustments when reality shows that the original approach is no longer enough. For a beginner, that is the heart of the topic. A control environment becomes mature not when it stops changing, but when it develops the discipline to notice change, respond thoughtfully, and keep improving before weakness turns into harm.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.